Our industry has embraced advanced work packaging. Leading companies are refining their current AWP programs, but most are exploring it for the first time. CII has established itself as the leading research organization for AWP resources and experts. But there is a challenge. Where can people find the information, tools, studies, and resources they need based on their unique AWP journey? The solution is here. The AWP CBA leveraged the Education and Outreach Committee and the CII technical team to design the AWP landing pages on the CII website. Let's take a look. The pages are easy to find from the menu navigation. Simply go to Resources and then AWP Overview. You will notice that we have 3 different user journeys or buckets: Discover, Engage, and Expand. Let's take a look at the goodies in each of these areas. The Discover bucket is for people or companies new to AWP. Resources here include basic information such as the AWP Education Primer, AWP acronyms and definitions, and a quick links to the knowledge base for research outputs like RT272. You will also notice that some items such as the AWP Concierge can be found in multiple buckets because it is relevant regardless of where the person is in their AWP journey. To download or get a quick link to any of these items, simply click the area and have at it. Please note that only CII members are able to download these items as part of their membership. Now let's look at the Engage bucket. The Engage bucket is for people or companies ready to deploy AWP as a pilot or with a new stakeholder group. Resources include the AWP ROI Investment Tool and AWP Maturity Level Benefits Tool. We are also encouraging people at this point in the journey to get involved with a joint working group or committee. We will look at that option later. Finally, let's see the Expand bucket. The Expand bucket is for people or companies growing or refining their current AWP program. This contains more advanced tools such as the AWP data requirements and quick links to supply chain research team outputs. A huge benefit of CII membership is the ability to get involved with the AWP community of experts. From the home landing page, users can access a list of the AWP committees and joint working groups and decide if they want to learn more. When you click into an area, you can learn about the objectives and goals of each group, and then take action by clicking Get Started with a Committee. Of course, if we have people that are not sure what they need to do, they can connect with someone at CII by clicking Submit a General Inquiry. A CII resource will help navigate them to their next step. That is it for the overview. Remember, the easiest way to get here is to click Resources, AWP Overview. Thank you to the members of the Education and Outreach Subcommittee and the technical team at CII for making these pages possible. Have a safe and great conference, everyone.
Well, we still have a lot more really good things to share with you. So if you don't have to go anywhere, please don't go anywhere. Right now, Stephen and I want to provide you with a brief, just kind of an overview and some closing thoughts of the time we've had together over the last 2 days. Just giving you a glimpse into what the future of CII and CURT may hold, what's on the horizon, and then we certainly want to introduce you to our keynote speaker, whom we're excited to share with you. First of all, I wanted to thank you for attending. You've heard it over and over. It is no small feat. It is an historic event, and you have helped make it so. We had several online, and we certainly don't fault those who are watching virtually, but we are thrilled that you were here in person. When we first started our conference planning, we were hopeful that we'd hit 300, then 350, then 400, then 450, and so on. But we are glad that you're here. It's the first major industry event of its kind in 18 months. And hopefully you've got an insight. If you're from the CURT side, hopefully you understand CII better. If you're from CII, we hope you have a greater understanding of CURT. We've certainly had a lot of insightful speakers over the last 2 days. All that information, all the contact information, all their content will be available on the app if it's not already. So the next move, frankly, is yours. It's yours, and we want you to be involved, and we're going to share with you perhaps how some of that can happen here. Stephen?
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, I mean, really, it's thank you all for being here. I don't know if it's resilience through innovation or innovation through resilience, but really, thank you for the courage that you took to come here and be with us. I think our time together has been super valuable. There's so many great things. You saw the work of the AWP Community for Business Advancement. That's just a phenomenal resource and thing in our industry, along with so many other things. So we're all about pressing forward, onward and upward, more and more innovation.
100%. Now, what about after we all leave tonight or tomorrow? We want to make communication with you our top priority. So expect to see resources, connective points, links, what have you, in our subsequent CII and CURT newsletter. Also, the Voice magazine has become much more amalgamated with the CII program as well. But we want to hear from you, and the first way we can hear from you, and I've had several comments throughout the last few days, but if you get into that app and take just a few moments as a gesture of thanksgiving and honor to our speakers and give us some feedback in that survey, I will guarantee you that we will absolutely read and consider every single comment made, whether you liked the flavor of the cotton candy or whether you hated one of the speakers. It doesn't matter. We will read and evaluate them all straight up. And we want you to be aware of that survey component in the app. So we are at an inflection point. As you can see on that slide there is a tidal wave of work. There is a tidal wave of work with the Alliance, a tidal wave of work with the separate organizations. There are workforce concerns that are probably higher than they've ever been since I've been in the industry and in the business. The opportunity for digitization, the opportunity for modernization works. And this slide, while taken from the movie The Perfect Storm, Stephen and I were challenging, and I'm saying, you know, it might be a perfect storm, but it's also a perfect opportunity. It's a perfect opportunity to engage. It's a perfect opportunity to create something new and different. It's also a perfect opportunity to engage young people. Let me take a moment of executive privilege. There are not many YPs here. That under 35 crowd, certainly the under 30 crowd, is quite sparse if you look around. And we understand they don't have the T&L budget that you often do. But I want to challenge you and encourage you to be not only their mentor, but be their sponsor. Make things happen for them. My wife and I have always been around young adults in a college setting. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati, as Stephen has been at the University of Texas. And you know as well as I do that mentoring and training and encouragement and support is fine, but sometimes they need a sponsor. Somebody who will knock on the door upstairs, go in and advocate for their involvement. And the time has come for that to happen. So you're going to hear more about our YP initiative, but we can't do it if they don't have your support. Over and over again, I don't have the money, I've got to go upstairs, I've got to go through 3 people, I'm told I don't have a T&L budget. We understand all that, and we're trying to make that, address those issues, certainly through our virtual component with our virtual attendees, and also by reducing the amount of travel that may be required to be actively engaged in our organization. We can't do it without you, so please be their sponsor. And finally, it's a perfect opportunity to carry forth what we began some years ago with this alliance. As we said, the pandemic was not the cause of it, It was a propellant, and it kind of empowered our thinking, gave us a time out to think, and we're excited about where we are going. Stephen.
Right, so the thing I wanted to say now is we are on the move. We are doing some great things. We are working together to confront the challenges, but also those opportunities. It is a perfect opportunity. And I think these two organizations really are leading the way. I mean, you saw the video about advanced work packaging. It's probably the greatest advance in work process for our industry in at least the last decade. And it's been going on, but boy, it's if you're not doing that, you need to be. Workforce development, as you've been hearing all conference long, we have to do a lot with that. That's actually something that CI has done a lot of research. CURT's been doing a lot of deployment activities in workforce development for a long time. So this relationship really works well together. Capital efficiency, lots and lots of things about capital efficiency, but actually now have the ability to measure that and use the data warehouse, the most modern approach to benchmarking and data that we have. You heard about that also in this conference. Operating System 2.0, new business model for what we're doing. We're already learning in that, just the risk component itself. You're looking at upwards of 20% TIC cost savings. And so we'll bring you more information in future conferences about OS2, but that's another game changer. ESG, we're looking at the criteria. We're launching workshops to figure out how ESG criteria apply to capital projects. We're looking at a digital workflow model. Everything that we have, StageGate, we're talking about 30 years old now, very sequential, very analog, not building on digital tools. So I think the industry's thought leadership is here. You guys are in the right place, and as Greg's saying, engage your colleagues, especially the younger set. They've got great ideas, they've got great passion. They want to jump in here, get their hands dirty, and really figure out things for the better. Help create what's next. That's really what it's all about.
Yeah, I will also remind you we have a number of upcoming events and opportunities. Please make note of those. And again, they're in the app. You'll hear more about them in subsequent communications once we get back to our offices. I won't read each and every one of them there, but we've got some coming up beginning in September. The Offsite Construction Summit for CURT is November the 10th. You're welcome to register, whether you're a CII or CURT member or not. Technology and productivity also, and I think it's on the other side of Florida. Coral Gables? No? Yes? Okay, great. And obviously the next joint conference, which will be nearly 6 months to the date from today, and that will also be down here in Florida. It'd be a better time to come anyway, won't it, in February? So as Stephen mentioned, we'd really like for you to avail yourself of these. I will tell you that in January, CII is going to launch the first ever Advanced Executive Leadership Program. Stephen, tell us why this one's different than what we've had in the past.
So we've been doing the Executive Leadership Program for about 15 years now, and as people transition from being senior technical managers to junior executives, they learn so much through the XLP. Now they've come back and say, well, as we move up from junior executives to senior executives, CEO type level, there's another set of curriculum that they need. So this is a completely separate curriculum. And this is the program for our industry. It was built for people who are in the capital projects industry. So if you are interested in that, please let us know. If colleagues or people you want to send from your company, this is 2 weeks long, just like the XLP. It's in residence. We do this in conjunction with the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas. And we're bringing in world-class instructors, experts from legal, SEC stuff, not Southeast Conference, Securities and Exchange Commission. But there's big news about Texas there too. But there's all kinds of different things about how do you actually lead and manage a big organization in this industry. So the last slide here before we bring up the keynote speaker is my favorite word. And if you've heard me talk before, I talk about this quite a bit, and that's compelling. Life is short, and you've got to really focus your energy where it's compelling. It's compelling for you as an individual, for your company, where you have passion. The other thing I always say when I talk is our industry is noble. I think it is the most noble industry of any industry, because you can't have healthcare or education or energy or transportation unless you first have a capital project. It's the basis of civilization. It's how we advance people's standard of living. And so I think what we do is compelling. I think that the fact that you are here despite the circumstances of the pandemic, it demonstrates your commitment and your passion. And that's actually the topic of our final keynote speaker. We have Julia Landauer. There's going to be a short video that plays here in a second. She's going to talk about her passion for what she does and how she can marry that passion with science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM. She's a proven champion race car driver, and I'm sure you're going to find what she has to say extremely inspiring. So we'll go ahead and play the slide, and I thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Stephen. It's been fun.
Thanks.
From an early age, Julia loved the human-machine interaction she experienced by maneuvering a vehicle around the track. Through her dedication to the sport she loved, Julia learned that being technically literate would better prepare her to thrive in her industry. In this talk, Julia describes some of the unexpected parallels between her two worlds, college in Silicon Valley and the racetrack. She shares her thoughts on being a female in a male-dominated space and how the STEM-related fields can be applied to many different fields of study and industries.
Thank you, guys. That was hands down the most impressive intro video that I have ever seen. Also some photos I have not seen in a little while, but that's okay. I am so happy to be here with you guys. Obviously, I think our worlds have some parallels, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into a little more of my background and then jump into the meat of the talk, which are 4 big things that I've learned in my almost 20 years of racing that have been valuable to me. And my hope for this afternoon session is, 1, to entertain you, but also to leave everyone, or have everyone leave with something for themselves and something for someone you care about. So with that, we might play another video. So that is a glimpse of what it's like to go minor league NASCAR racing, for those of you who are not familiar. And I'm just waiting for my presentation to get back up, and then we'll get going. Oh, I'm so sorry, that's my fault. Anyway, I got started in racing go-karts when I was 10 years old. And originally, it was an activity that my parents wanted me and my siblings to do, partially so that we could get that hands-on mechanical understanding. Also, they wanted something that we could do together on the weekends, and they wanted something their girls could do head-to-head against the boys. And racing is one of the very cool sports that has co-ed competition to the highest levels. And I loved it right away. I loved that I was, as said in the video, this scrawny 10-year-old kid that was maneuvering a machine. I loved working with adults and the added responsibility that that brought. And I loved winning, and I started doing that. And then by the time I was 12 and had proven that I could be quite competitive, I told my parents that I wanted to figure out how to do this for as long as I could. And so we did a bunch of research and jumped into the Skip Barber Racing Series, which is a Arrive and Drive series, but it is something where some of the greats have gotten their feet wet in racing, like Marco Andretti and Danica Patrick. And then when I was 14 years old, I ended up winning 12 out of my 14 races and became the series' first female champion, which was so cool. And it was cool for a number of reasons. One, I was a 14-year-old girl finally going through puberty in middle school in New York City. It wasn't like the most enjoyable period of my life. And racing was this outlet where I could just work exceptionally hard and be so proud of myself and make my parents proud of me. And it was kind of icing on the cake that I was beating all of these guys who were 20, 30, 40 years old. And so it was great. I mean, because it meant, like, in these very formative years, I felt like I belonged, and it didn't faze me that I was the only girl who was racing in this very male-dominated field. So I loved it. It was also around this time when I was 14 or 15 that I realized, like, the race cars are very complex, and there's so much to know, and I started to realize, sometimes people didn't really expect the little girl or a teenage girl to be able to know mechanically what was going on. So I put in a lot of active effort to make sure I was well-versed in at least the top-level technological components of racing so that I never sounded dumb, and also so that I could be a better racer and I could give better feedback and hopefully be more successful. And so a couple of things that I found really exciting about racing were just so much like construction, the fact that you're putting all of these systems together, both physical and electrical and chemical, to make this machine move is so, so cool. The fact that it works is just incredible. Another thing that I really loved was the very practical application of aerodynamics. So when we were in go-karts and we're little kids, we're taught very early on that when you get onto the straightaway, you kind of jump in your seat to get the wheels spinning, but you also duck your head down so that you don't have as much surface area that's hitting the wind and hitting the air, so you reduce your drag. That is so cool as a little kid to learn that there's this very physical concept that you're able to then apply to something you love. So I loved that my parents pointed that out. I also really appreciate the safety and the technological advancements with safety. So how many of you are familiar with NASCAR or watch NASCAR or have watched NASCAR? Okay, cool, awesome, love that. So it might look like there are concrete walls around the racetracks, but what they've actually done over the past handful of years is put together these things called safer barriers. And what they are really strong steel followed by densely packed foam and then the concrete wall. And the reason this has been such an innovative part of racing is because in a crash, when a car hits that safer barrier, the barrier compresses and it absorbs some of the kinetic energy so that the driver inside the car doesn't. And it's also why the cars are built to crumble like a street car so that you don't have to deal with the kinetic energy. And racing has become one of the safest, or I should say that differently, sorry. NASCAR has become one of the safest sports since Dale Earnhardt Sr. died 20 years ago, and we haven't had a death since then. So knowing that there's all this effort going into the research and development of the safety components is very cool. The next thing that I have really loved about racing is the build of the racetracks. It is this incredible puzzle that you have to put together because sometimes the inside of the racetrack is flatter, but it's the shorter distance around. But if you're on the higher banks, then you're able to go faster. So you're having to do those really quick calculations as to how are you going to optimize the physics of the race car while on these tracks. And the last thing that I really, really love about racing is all of the biometrics and all of the biological components in it. So for those of you who have never been in a race car or aren't familiar, imagine that you're muscling around 3,400 pounds of machine for hours on end, and the motor's right up front, so it gets to be 150 degrees in the car during the summers. We're all suited up, we have the helmet, and we're kind of constrained, so all of the actions are like this. And then the tires are going away, you're burning off fuel, so the car is changing, so you're having to adapt to that, and you've got other people who want to pass you, and you want to pass other people. So it's exhausting, and to be in the best physical shape you can be in is really important. And I just wanted to share one really innovative form of practice that my trainer does. I see a motorsport-specific trainer, and he does a lot of work with neck training and head training to try to delay any onsets of a concussion, which we deeply appreciate. But one of the ways that he trains me from a neurological standpoint is that he'll have me on a stationary bike where I'm pedaling, and then I'll have strobe goggles on. So if you think of strobe light at a party, it flashes, right? And these goggles do the exact same thing, and it limits my visual input. So I'm pedaling, I have these strobe goggles on, and then he throws tennis balls at me that I have to catch. And it's a wonderful, not too harmful training process, but it's this idea that he really pushes the boundaries and finds kind of all of the maybe less obvious parts that we can train to try to make me a better racer. And I think on the theme of innovation, kind of pushing those boundaries and finding the unobvious things to train can be really helpful. So I digress a little bit, but now I want to get back to my background. So because of all of this technical stuff that I knew I wanted to continue learning, plus the fact that my parents told me that racing is a very expensive sport and they weren't going to pay for it forever, I knew that I was going to have a better understanding of the business side and how I could market myself and be valuable to a team and a sponsor or a partner. And so because of this, I really wanted to go to college, and my first choice was Stanford. Now, I felt fairly confident. You know, I was this 18-year-old champion race car driver from New York. I had decent grades and good test scores. And so I felt pretty good. So I applied early, and much to my surprise, and maybe it was exceptionally arrogant of me, but I didn't get in right away. And I was perplexed, and I didn't know what I had to do differently. So I decided to email the Dean of Admissions and politely ask why the admissions committee didn't like my application, or what, so I could, you know, try to do better. I casually mentioned this to my college advisor in high school, and she ripped me a new one. She was so flabbergasted that I would have the audacity to reach out to such a big decision maker and request special attention. And I thought, well, this is a little bit of a weird reaction because I did the best I could on my application, and I don't know what wasn't good enough. So by asking, the worst case is that I'm not going to get an answer, and the best case is that I'm going to get a specific response. Sure enough, the Dean of Admissions himself responded, told me to work on my grades, and that was that. So moral of the story here is that you always have to ask the question. There's so little downside to asking the question if you need information, if you need help, you know, whatever it is, because there really rarely is any worst case scenario. So I did eventually get in. I got a Bachelor's of Science in Science, Technology, and Society, which is very interdisciplinary, allowed me to dabble in a lot of different classes. And then halfway through my college experience, I decided that I would apply for the TV show Survivor, and I got accepted. There we go. Now, how many people here have watched Survivor? Okay, cool. So for those of you who have not, the premise of the show is that you're on an island with your tribe, and you're competing in challenges. The losers have to vote someone off the island, and then you're playing for $1 million and the title of Sole Survivor. Now, I got very fixated on the $1 million part. Like, I thought, okay, I'm a 20-year-old Stanford student who's a race car driver. Like, if I play as well as a single parent or someone working a minimum wage job, you know, why would they give me $1 million? So I decided not to tell anybody. I just focused on the racing. But the problem was that I was in the heart of my college education, and I was concealing this incredibly big part of my life. On top of that, I was hungry, dehydrated, you're pissed off at all the people you're with because they really are crazy, authentically crazy. And so to play it safe so that I didn't, you know, spill my secret and let people know that I was deceiving them, I just decided to be a little quieter. I got the boring edit, which, you know, surprise, but the eventual winner of the show, spoiler alert, I didn't win my season. On the episode I was voted out, the eventual winner had a monologue with the camera where he said, and I quote, "I'm tempted to say that Julia has a vanilla personality, but I fear that would do a disservice to the flavor vanilla." It gets better. You see, people actively seek out vanilla-flavored products. Kids clamor for a vanilla ice cream cone, but no one seeks out anything Julia-flavored. 9 million people watched that. This was such a PR problem because here I was, this 20-year-old, first time doing reality TV, learned I'm not so good at it, but I had been so purposeful in everything I was doing to that point to try to better my racing career, and it just got shat on, for lack of a better word, excuse me. Like, it was just so bad. And so this was a very big lesson in the importance of self-awareness and being very intentional about how you're presenting yourself, because people make split-second decisions, and because everyone has a different perspective in life, you have to do the best that you can to try to limit that, you know, interpretation window. So it was a very painful way to learn that. But I survived. I did get back to Stanford, where I was getting ready to graduate, and something interesting happened my senior year. So I had always had the very clear path that I was going to go to school, and then I was going to move to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I'd pursue my racing career. And everything I did kind of led towards that. But I started having people ask, you know, what are you doing after graduation? I would tell them, say I'm going to go NASCAR racing. And they would ask, well, then what are you going to do with your degree? Or why did you come to school in the first place? And this was a very big aha moment for me, because I realized that I could no longer rely on external validation for what I was doing. I was going to have to be confident enough in my decisions, and it wasn't my job to explain my thought process to everyone, and it wasn't their job to understand it. And as someone who had always been a bit of a people pleaser, this was a very liberating thing to learn. You know, have your close circle, but you don't have to please everyone, you don't have to explain it to everyone, and it gives you a lot less baggage that you have to deal with. So I did move to North Carolina. I raced in a local NASCAR series where my first year out of college, which was the first year I didn't have to balance school and racing, I won half my races and won a championship. And then since then, I have been climbing the minor league ranks of NASCAR in the US and Canada. And then last year in 2020, I was lucky enough to make it over to Europe, where I lived for 3 months to race in a very condensed European NASCAR series, where I finished 5th in the championship, which is the highest for an American ever. So that was a very cool silver lining to an otherwise really stressful year. And that is a whirlwind tour of who I am. And now what I want to do is switch gears, pun totally intended, I love a racing pun, and go through those 4 big lessons that I learned that I hope are valuable to you. The first is the idea of taking ownership. Seems simple, but I was very lucky to learn how important this is when I was really young. So this photo was taken when I was about 11 years old. And I had already proven that I could win races. I was already competitive. But on this particular race weekend, we were just having an off day. And I had asked my parents to make changes after practice to the go-kart, and they did, and we went out to qualify, which is where you go as fast as you can for a few laps at a time to set the starting order for a race. And it still wasn't handling very well, so I asked my parents to make more changes for the race, and they did. So I'm getting ready to go racing. I'd qualified kind of mid-pack, a little further back than that. So I knew that on the start of the race, when we're all bunched together, that's the easiest time to try to overtake people. So I went in really hard into turn 1. I was convinced the go-kart was going to work, and it was understeering, so it didn't turn as precisely and as quickly as I had hoped. So some people got by me. I got it together, I went into the next big passing zone, went in really hard again, and sure enough, the go-kart didn't react the way I wanted it to. So then I immediately started getting frustrated, and I was overdriving, and I was missing my marks, and by the end of the race, I was somewhere near the back, and I was the most pissed off little 11-year-old that you will ever see. And I parked my go-kart, and I ripped my helmet off, and I threw it in the seat, and I marched up to my dad, and I screamed, "You messed up the go-kart. If I had made a better change, if you had made a better change, I could have won the race. How could you do this to me?" And then I realized I had made a very big mistake, because I saw the iciest stare that I've ever seen from my dad, and he walked up to me, looked down, and said, "Fuck you." You told me to make the change to that go-kart, and I did my best, and if it's not what you wanted, too bad. When you're out there, it's you and the go-kart, and you need to make it work. Sorry for picking on you. He was completely right. You know, he could have been actively sabotaging me, but when I go to the racetrack, my one job is to do everything that I can to win the race. And so if the go-kart was not perfect, which, spoiler alert for life, rarely is our situation perfect, I could do 2 things. I could do what I did, which was get pissed and quit, or I could have mustered everything. I could have figured out how I could have used my gas and my brake differently, how I could have changed my line on the track so that I could, compensate for the go-kart not handling. Anything to have tried my hardest. Not only would my drive home have been much more pleasant, because it wasn't, and my little siblings were like laughing at me because I was getting ripped a new one over and over again, but I also would have known that I had tried. And even though it didn't turn out, I wouldn't have looked back and regretted. And as I get older, I'm learning that if you don't get something that you want and that you worked hard for, if you look back and feel that you could have done more for it, it's a really gut-wrenching feeling. And at the end of the day, we're really only responsible for our actions and our reactions. We can't control what other people do. We can't control what natural disasters happen. But how we find every little bit that we do have some influence over and focus on that, that's where we find our power. And Steve Maraboli is a behavioral scientist, and he has a wonderful quote where he says, "The victim mindset dilutes the human potential. By not accepting personal responsibility for our circumstances, we greatly reduce our power to change them." And what I really like about this is that it puts the onus on us, which is scary, but I think all of us want to be fairly autonomous adults. And by taking the mindset that things are happening to you, your ceiling for potential is quite a bit lower. Whereas if you see and seek out all of the things that you can influence and can control, your ceiling's that much higher, and you're that much more likely to see the opportunities that arise, especially if they're a little less obvious. And as I mentioned, this is a little scary. And so the next thing I want to talk about is working with fear. Because throughout most of my career, especially when I was a teenager and a kid doing it, people would just tell me, oh, you must be so fearless. And I just kind of accepted it. It's like, yeah, I race cars, they go really fast. I guess I'm not scared. But I realized that this was wrong, and I had this really big misconception about my relationship with fear. And I didn't really start thinking about it until my 2016 season. And this photo was taken at Irwindale Speedway in Irwindale, California, and we were racing, and before the race, my teammate and I, who I really respect him, we went to an elementary school where we were speaking with kindergarten through second graders. This is a challenging audience. But the last question we got was game changer for me. And it was from this little first grade girl. And she just simply asked, don't you get scared? And I took the microphone first and I gave the answer that I had always given to that point, which was something to the effect of, no, I can't let myself get scared because then I won't drive the car as fast as I have to win the race. And I sat down and my teammate got up and he said, well, I guess I must be a little different than Julia because I do get scared. And I tuned out the rest of what he said because I realized in that moment that I had done a huge disservice to everyone who had asked me that question and completely lied in my answer because of course I get scared. Racing is scary. It's scary to go fast and crash with a bunch of go-karts on you. It's scary to go 175 miles an hour into a corner and you hope your brakes continue to work, but they might not, and there's a wall on the other side of the turn. It might be a safer barrier, but it's still a wall you don't want to hit, right? And it's scary to be an individual driver that joins a team that's been working together for years, and you're the new kid on the block. And there's just so much that is scary. But again, I had this misconception. So in very big nerd form, I went home after that race weekend, and I just did a lot of research on the biology of fear. This is not an exhaustive note-taking. But the big thing that I learned was that fear and excitement are very closely related in the brain. And so I must have been kind of transferring that negative fear energy into positive energy, plus my desire to make myself proud, make my team proud, the excitement of winning. Those feelings outweighed the feelings of fear. And when I dug a little bit further, I learned some of the ways that fear manifests itself in the body. And this is something that's super important that I really recommend everyone focus in on, is really recognizing what the symptoms are of fear for you, and then trying to minimize them. So I learned that, I knew that I always get nervous before a race. If I'm not nervous, I'm not in the right headspace. But these nerves are really uncomfortable. It's like knots in my stomach, my heart rate's up. And I inadvertently learned that if I sprint before a race and then do some jumping jacks and just do some high heart rate exercises, it really helps calm me down. I realized this because I was late to strap into the car and I really had to go to the bathroom, and so it's that tough dynamic, and it's like, do I go, do I not? So I sprinted to the bathroom, sprinted to the car. But again, I just felt so much better. I felt more positively excited. And so that's one example. Another example is, when your heart rate's up, you can use really incredible breathing methods, and the military uses a lot of breathing techniques to help get your central nervous system back to neutral, which is where you're more likely to perform effectively. And so again, I really encourage you guys to kind of dig deep and have your kids dig deep as to recognizing how fear manifests itself, working on trying to minimize those fears, and then also have the little mental push where, if you find yourself in the position where you have to decide, are you going to do the thing that scares you, or are you going to walk away? I encourage you to ask yourself the question, why not? It's simple, it's silly, but it requires a lot of self-awareness. It requires you to know what you're willing to risk and what you're not, what values you have, what tenets you live by. But if you can't give yourself a good enough reason not to do something, besides the fact that it makes you uncomfortable, then I think you owe it to yourself to try. Because as Neil Donald Walsh says, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And the more that you tackle things that are scary, the more you push your limits and you find out that you're going to be okay, regardless of how it turns out, the higher your threshold is for doing scary things. And that's where you start to find the really exciting parts of success, where you find where your strengths are and what all you can accomplish. And I think that's a really exciting space to be in. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about leadership. Now, I am fully aware that many of you in this room have more leadership experience than I do. And I also think that as a driver, we're in a very interesting position when it comes to leadership, because on the one hand, we are the paying customer, whether it's personally or through sponsorship at this point, racing is basically where you pay the team to provide a service of preparing the car and having the car to race. So in that sense, I'm a customer. But then also everyone on the team is working so hard for me to go do what I want to do and for me to go have fun so that we can hopefully win. So it's an interesting dynamic. And I learned kind of after I graduated Stanford and got out of that little bubble that is higher education, I realized that having the labels of New Yorker, female, Stanford grad, sometimes had negative connotations in the eyes of the people that I was working with, right? I learned that people assumed I was going to be really pretentious and a bit of a princess, which was rough because I definitely didn't want them to think that, but I learned just, again, how important it was to be very intentional as I joined this team. And this is the case for any new team, and we join a new team almost every year. So a couple of big things that I learned were, one, to have an appreciation for individual styles and needs. And what I mean by that is that I realized that, in a team of let's say 8 people on the team, I had one engineer once who was so soft-spoken and so, I don't want to say timid, but just quieter. And what I found was that if I came in high energy or hot-headed after a session or really enthusiastic, that's not where he thrived. And so for me to put in the active effort to make sure, okay, let me tone it down a little bit, let me be a little more subdued, a little more intellectual, just back to back, that's where he thrived, and that's where we had more effective conversations. At the exact same time, my lead, or my crew chief, was so high energy, big guy, so rah-rah, he wanted to fist bump, he was just all over the place. And it was also authentic for me to bring some version of that in Julia style to him. And by putting in the extra little effort to figure out how these people who were very different from me thrived, it then not only showed that I was interested in actually being a good team player, but it really just helped everyone perform their best, and that was a worthwhile thing for me to put in as kind of the nucleus of the team. The second thing that was really important was to be intentional and approachable with my communication. So again, a lot of teams that I've joined hadn't worked with a woman racer, hadn't worked with a New Yorker before. Again, there were these preconceived notions. And I think especially with the male-female dynamic, very quickly, if ladies are more assertive, it can sometimes be seen as bossy or another B word, right? And so I realized it was very helpful for me to just be upfront about how I expected myself to talk. So on the one hand, we were going to have a lot of fun. I have a 14-year-old boy sense of humor, and so that was going to be, out there also. But at the same time, if I needed something done differently, I was going to be very probably quick and blunt about asking for it. At the same time, I really wanted people to know that if they see something that I can do differently, I want them to tell me, don't be afraid to tell me, because I want to be able to do the best I can, and if I'm blind to something, it's a big service for you to help me. But then equally important of saying that is when they did give feedback, to accept it gracefully and to be appreciative. And I found that by being explicit like that, it kind of took out that initial awkwardness or that trying to find your footing, and allowed us to just be more effective in communication, because communication is so hard. And a big lesson that I've learned is that, there's no reason that I, raised how I was, should have the same communication styles as you and how you were raised, right? Everyone has different upbringings and styles, and being cognizant of that is very helpful when it comes to leading a team. The last thing with leadership that I want to talk about is understanding those different lived experiences that I just talked about. And in the intro here, Greg was saying that it's not necessarily the youngest or most diverse industry that we're working with here, which is fine. But I think in trying to get people of different backgrounds and different experiences into industries or into teams, it's so important to remember that the way that they get to where they're going is not going to be the same as you. There's no reason that a white man would have the same experience as a black woman, right? There are cultural things that go on. And so I encourage leaders to put in a little effort to kind of understand some of the research that's out there, so you can understand kind of some of the different obstacles that people different from you might be facing. For example, one of the most infuriating research studies I came across at school was where researchers asked mothers to set a ramp however steep they thought their toddler could climb up. And mothers routinely set that ramp steeper for boys than they do for girls. And so from toddlerhood, parents are inadvertently encouraging boys to challenge themselves and find their physical limits and get that spatial awareness, and very importantly, fall down and get back up. and we protect our girls from doing that. And I know it comes from a good place, but that doesn't help down the line. So if you know that women are generally less likely to be encouraged to push themselves, that then translates in the professional space. Also, there is the Harvard Business Review study, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, where when thinking about applying for a job or applying for a promotion, men feel qualified to apply if they meet 60% of the prereqs, whereas women feel they need to meet 100%. Now, this kind of makes sense in a society where we really pressure women to be perfect in a lot of ways. But if you know that as a leader that you might be missing out on the applicant pool because they don't feel qualified, that's a really powerful tool to have. And so, I speak about gender research because it's what I'm more familiar with, but there's plenty about racial differences and the different lived experiences that people have. And not only is it interesting just from a community level, I just think it's really powerful to have those tools and that knowledge as you try to grow your industry and grow your company and your business to be able to tap into some of those more diverse talent pools. And there's obviously isn't an exhaustive list of leadership tips, but if you're able to do this and if you're able to show that this is how you lead, you're then able to foster a community of leaders. And I think that this is really important as you're looking to transition into newer technologies, or if people are phasing out, to be able to feel confident that what you're doing is helping this next generation is so exciting. Daunting, for sure, but so exciting. And Bill Bradley has a great quote about leadership, where he says, "Leadership is unlocking people's potential to become better." And what I absolutely love about this is that it means whether you're a C-level executive or an entry-level employee, if you're able to help someone perform better or their best, then you are that leader. And I think that that's a really important thing, especially for the millennial and lower generation, because we were raised, and I know I was raised to think that I should make an impact on the world. And so it's like kind of turn it back on them, say, all right, you want to make an impact, you want to have responsibility, make people better, contribute to the overall community. And I think that's a really powerful thing, because I just feel that societies and teams and companies thrive when every member is an active participant. And so the more that we can empower people to be active, the better. And the last thing that I want to talk about is perseverance. Because we've had a really rough 18 months, some people more rough than others, and I found that this year I was having to practice what I preach so much more because it was a very challenging year. And I'm going to get a little more vulnerable with you guys here, although I saw that this photo was used in the intro video. I don't typically show this photo because it's not cute. And I don't mean that in like a superficial appearance way. I mean, I look at this photo and I see someone who is deeply upset, who is unhappy, not proud of herself, not proud of her team. And that was because in this season, we were just having an awful season. I had several good seasons back to back, and in this season, it was a combination of feeling like I couldn't get the team to buy into me, and I was bending over backwards to try to make the team a good place for all of my team members. We had some weird mechanical failures that really shouldn't have happened, kind of back to back to back, and we had some not so great communication. So I had gone from being competitive and on the podium the year before to like maybe being able to get a top 10. And even though I took responsibility, I fixed what I needed to fix, but even though I could see that so much of it was not in my control, it was having a very real and bad effect on my confidence. And I started to question, am I just losing my edge? Am I 27 years old now and just too old for this? I'm like losing that spark. And I remember I was at home and I walked into the bathroom and I just caught a glimpse of myself. And it was the saddest version of Julia that I had seen. And my gut instinct right then and there was to turn to the mirror and scream, "You are great! You have 2 championships, you have dozens of wins, you got a degree, you win on Survivor." I just listed off the objective things that I had done that no one could take away from me. And it didn't change my mindset overnight, but I realized just how much negative self-talk I had been having in my head, even because of these external factors that were influencing me. And it goes back to the point that you have control over your reactions to things, and it's challenging, but it requires you to be very intentional. It's easy to do well and to thrive when things are going well. But when things are challenging, whether it's in your control or not, you have to be super intentional about how you're using your mind, because our brains are so powerful, which means they can really hurt us also. And being intentional about the people that you're with, and how you're spending your time. And some key things that I found to be really helpful when kind of needing to be my own cheerleader was to remember my goals. So in that season I was talking about, I was not having any fun at the racetrack. It was like, oh man, I have to go. And that really hurt because the whole reason I was pursuing racing was because I loved it so much and because it put me on such a high and I loved working with people and all of this. So I had to remember that. But then at the same time, remembering that when you're not achieving that can be kind of overwhelming. So it's very important to regroup and break it down. And something my mom said when I was having a challenging season learning a new type of car, she said, Julia, just hit your marks. Focus on hitting the gas, turning in, or I guess hitting the brakes, turning in, then hitting the gas. Don't hit the gas going into a corner. It won't be so good for you. And by breaking it down, not only was I giving myself a clear roadmap as to how I could get to a fast time, but I was also able to give myself little victories, right? I mastered that entry to that corner. Awesome. All right, let's go, let's go. And the last thing that's super important is to feel what you need to feel. And this was something that was very apparent this year. You know, if you're really frustrated or really angry, feel it, let it out. Don't cause harm to others, but let it out. Exercise, you know, whatever it has to do, feel it. If you need to grieve, let yourself grieve the way you have to, because the sooner you're able to tackle what your emotions are, the sooner you're able to move on and get back to doing what you want to do. And similarly, if you're so proud of yourself, be so proud of yourself. Like, celebrate that stuff and acknowledge it and tell people you care about that you're really proud, because then again, that's going to give you a lot of really good energy. And Winston Churchill has an amazing quote, and clearly I'm a big quotes fan, but he says, success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. And this is incredibly important on the personal level, because you need enthusiasm to continue when it's not pleasant or when it's tough. But then also, I'm pretty sure that every one of us in this room is going to need someone else's help or assistance or guidance along the way. And if we're not enthusiastic about what we're doing, then why should anyone else be, right? So maintain that enthusiasm, and thank you. I'm gonna steal one of these waters.
Thank you very much, Julia. You have certainly inspired us and encouraged us. You have spoken to our heads as well as to our hearts, and for that we're grateful.
You bet.
Ours is a people business where no one trusts anyone. And so as you encourage, am I right? They know. That's why they're laughing.
You should all be on Survivor, yes.
That's why they find it
thrive.
funny. And to speak to us about personal development and our own personal welfare and well-being is a nice way to put an exclamation point on this conference, a cherry on the kibosh. But we do have a few questions before we go, and I'd like to share those with you.
You bet.
Someone from our audience asked, Julia, what was your very scariest moment in racing, and how did you use it to better yourself? Can you share with us your scariest moment?
Well, there have been a bunch. I would say there was one crash, and I will preface this by saying every race car driver crashes. If they don't crash, they're not going fast enough, and it's something that you have to get used to. But before you crash really hard, especially in a car, you don't know what it's going to be like, right? No one can really envision what it's like to smash a bunch of metal into a barrier. So we had one race in that Skip Barber series where the instructors were very explicit, like, if you go off the track a little bit in this one point, just hold the car straight. Don't try to get back on the track right away, because there's a big dip and you'll just shoot across. So what do when I drop wheels at that one part of the track? I immediately try to get back on track, and it shot my car through the wet grass where you just lose all control. The brakes don't work, the steering doesn't work, and it just went kind of on a diagonal into the wall. And it was terrifying to feel like I had no control over this very powerful vehicle. It was scary to think about what my dad was gonna say when I got out of the car, and apparently the instructor or the announcer said, "No one wants to be Julia today," because he saw my dad marching back. My dad's a great guy, though. He had a little bad rap on this talk, but he's a great guy. And what I learned was that it's so important to assess your mistakes when you have something that goes wrong like that, and that it's really important to find your pace at which you get back on the horse. So I couldn't just go out the next time my car was back together. I couldn't just go out and go full out through that corner because I no longer trusted myself with it. And so building up to it and getting on the gas at a certain point and then a little bit earlier and then letting the car get a little further out, it was a very methodical, pragmatic build back after something was scary. Not just jumping right back on the horse, for me.
Closely related to that question, a little different, a little nuance on it. What was your greatest failure, perhaps your biggest failure, and how did you use that experience? How profound was it? What effect did it have on you?
Yeah, so Survivor was a pretty big failure. I'll be honest, I was pretty cocky going into it and luckily social media wasn't as huge as it is now, but I read all the comments and it was just really awful to have that first really big failure and not performing well in front of so many people. And it really forced me to sit on my rock and figure out what had gone wrong, figured out why I had friends and I had boyfriends and people liked me, but it wasn't translating on what I was projecting to people. So that was a really big lesson. And I mean, there are other racing failures that I've had where I feel like I should have won and I didn't. And then it comes down to, again, that assessment of what did I have control over, and then having to just pick it back up and understanding that I didn't do what I knew I was capable of is probably the biggest failure. And so just accepting it and putting your ego aside and just building back.
Great, thank you. Being intentional. Have you ever had to make hard changes in your team in order to be intentional about who you surround yourself with? Dismissing someone who doesn't fit the mission or the vision. Comments?
Yeah, so I don't have any of the corporate experience like you guys have, obviously. I'm going to kind of answer that in two ways. One, I had one team where I was not meshing with my driver coach, and he's the spotter, so we have spotters because we have very limited vision, and so they help us not hit people, and if someone's on the inside, they let us know. And for the first few races of the season, I just was not meshing with him. I felt he wasn't enthusiastic. I went to the team owner and I asked, can I have someone else as my spotter? And this team owner was like, I don't think you want to do that. Try to make it work. And it forced me to be much more communicative. And so I went up to him and I had those hard decisions, I don't feel like you're communicating enough with me. I feel like I'm asking for this information. This is what I need. I want to know, where the people are behind me. I want to know what my lap times are. I want to know if you see something that I can do differently. I want that feedback all the time. And he responded with, because he used to be a racer, and he was like, well, if my spotter had ever talked to me like that, I would rip the radio out. And it was so clear that, again, that was where that lesson in being very intentional about, your communication was, because his experience was different than what I needed. And he ended up being the biggest male ally that I could have had on the team, and stood up for me so much and spoke out when he saw this bias. And so it's had I not, been, explicit in that communication, it wouldn't have happened. As for actually getting rid of people on teams, I've never fired anyone. And so I've always, and partially because the driver doesn't have that control a lot of times on the team, so I've been forced to work with it. And then if I felt like it couldn't work anymore, then I didn't renew with the team and I left. Because I think life's short and you can try for a little bit, and if it's not gonna work, then I'm a believer in cutting your losses. Yeah. I don't know if that's politically correct, but that's how I feel.
One of your listeners says, can you remind us what your degree from college was in, and if you had to do it all over again, would you choose that same major?
Oh, great question, yeah. So I did something called Science, Technology, and Society, and my approach to college, I worked very hard in school, but I was never a naturally gifted student. I had to work really hard, I had to study really hard. My brother and sister, academics came to them so easily, and it was so unfair. And so with Science, Technology, and Society, what was so cool about it was that I knew I wouldn't have to do a deep dive into anything. And I felt that at school, I knew I didn't want to be a doctor or lawyer or something where you have to have that kind of focused education. I knew that I wanted to learn about all the stuff that I didn't know about, and I wanted to be able to take a graphic novel class, a cartoon, class and learn about literature that way, and I wanted to be able to take women's history, but I also wanted to take computer science. And so this was such an interdisciplinary major where mine had a focus on, technology that was so cool, and I'm so grateful I did it, and I would not go back and do it any differently.
Closely related, why did you choose Stanford, and how do you intend to use that education in the future?
Great question, nice and loaded question. So I chose Stanford for a couple reasons. On the kind of superficial level, I love my family deeply, but I felt like I was very dependent on them, and so I really wanted to go kind of far away. I also just loved California, and I'd visited a couple times, and Stanford also had they had a focus, and they were kind of showing off some of the research around green energy that they were doing and the way that applies to cars, and I'm well aware that my industry is not particularly good for the environment, and so I've always been interested in how you can offset it in not only the car, but in other parts like, importing food versus using local, all that stuff. So because of that, I really wanted to go there, and second part, how am I going to use it? So, great question. I mean, for me, one of the big values of school was the network that you're exposed to afterwards. And again, I am a big believer in asking questions, and I cold email so many people. I don't get responses from some of them, but for the most part, people get back to me, and I just think it's really cool to understand how other people will have their expertises and how that then applies to what I like, and just trying to learn, again, what I don't know. So I'm sure it'll come in handy more, kind of post the driving side of my career, but I'm not there yet, so I don't think about it too much yet. For better or worse, it might bite me.
Yeah, that's smart. I think that's quite
It might be
smart.
smart, it might not be smart, we'll find out.
I find your involvement with Survivor intriguing. What was the greatest lesson or the best lesson you took away from your time on Survivor?
So self-awareness was the biggest one, but the other one was that Survivor was the first time I was in an environment where I couldn't trust anybody. Ooh. And that was a really tough...
Welcome to the construction industry. We're glad that you're here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. No, it was fascinating because I also learned that I probably wasn't the best personality type for the Survivor, but it was really tough to have to work so hard and keep our morale up because we lost every challenge except one, because we were fans versus favorites, so it was one tribe was returning players, one tribe was new, inherently unfair. I will forever be bitter about it, but we just lost everything, and so to keep the morale up, and we actually were quite close in a lot of the challenges, and so to have that kind of miserable bonding experience, but then also forgetting that I forgot that I can't trust people, and then I got blindsided and I got voted off. So that was really hard, but an important lesson to remember. It's not like the happiest lesson, but it's an important lesson to know that be careful with who you trust with your energy and your time and your intel.
Very
nice and uplifting, I know.
Another listener sent a question. Everyone talks about all the disadvantages of being a woman in a male-dominated industry, such as construction or racing. But what advantages have you found, and how could we leverage those kind of advantages in our industry?
That's a great question. So one of the biggest advantages has been that because I and other women and other minorities are kind of novel, we get a lot of press, and so that's been helpful as you try to build up your reputation. I also think that sometimes there was more respect. Sometimes there wasn't as much respect, and so that's a kind of a double-edged sword. But in the moments where there were, and people were taking me quite seriously, that was really good. And the other thing I learned was that I had one team owner that he knew that his equipment was great, he knew that he had great people, and so he just expected that whoever got in his car was going to be capable of winning. And so I had been underestimated so many times because there are so few examples of women who are competitive in racing, that to have a team owner where he just expected me to be competitive was so, empowering and exciting, because I didn't have to prove my worth to them. And I think that's a big lesson. I'm kind of taking a windy road here, but I think that's a big lesson to not underestimate people who don't look like you, or who don't have, or who as a group do not have a track record, because we feel it, even if it's not intentional. If you don't really expect someone to perform their job well, that person will feel it. And obviously, if they're not qualified, don't pretend they are. But if they are, try not to give off those underestimating vibes.
Great answer, Julia. You probably have noticed walking in today that the construction industry is really struggling with attracting young people. Obviously, an older industry attracted you. Any advice for us?
From talking with friends who are not in racing and joining the workforce more traditionally, I think that kind of I don't want to say work-life balance because it's not that, but like creating an environment where people can bring out their best. And I know that there are lots of parameters with a corporate setting, and I'm not familiar with all of them, so I know that there are limits there. But making it a place where people can collaborate and not be punished for collaborating, or it's hard because I also feel like there are such big generational things, and like I know, I kind of referenced this earlier, I know that when I went through college, the overwhelming message was that I was working hard, therefore I was special, and therefore I should be able to garner that respect, and I should, kind of like what people yell at millennials for, of feeling entitled. Well, people told us that. So I know that we have to take ownership and take responsibility, but it came from somewhere. And I think kind of being patient, but then also using, if someone's not behaving or not acting or the way that you think is appropriate, I think giving them the benefit of the doubt that it's a lack of education and not so much just being an entitled little brat is helpful. And so that's once you have people like more face-to-face, but yeah, I mean, using opportunities to explain why maybe their expectations are not being met, or why you might feel that they're out of touch, and maybe they're not. Maybe these are the perspectives that are gonna be more successful later on. We just don't know, right? So I wish I had a more solid answer for you, but that's kind of like a messy answer I have for you.
It's a good answer.
Okay,
we'll
thank
receive
you.
it. We'll receive it with gratitude. Another listener says, we've seen where you've come from and what you're doing now. What do you think the future holds? Is there a time coming when you get out of the car for good?
So I don't think I'll ever get out of the car for good. I will be the first to admit that I have not made it to the level of NASCAR that I would hope to have made it to by now. It's a very difficult sport, very financially driven, and just very challenging. And that being said, I know how much joy I get from it, so I'll always spend some time in the car, but there is a next chapter. Like I know that racing and speaking and this kind of really high, fast-paced life will not be forever for me. But again, because I'm like so focused on like a few more years of pushing really hard, I'm not totally looking to the future yet. But I want to do something creative that allows me to build and work with my assets, and then be able to work with a lot of cool people. So it's a little vague, but the future is a little scary. So I don't think about it until I really have to, which is not the message I should be giving. But with that specific scary thing, I'm going to tackle it later.
Let us encourage you. We're still trying to figure it out, too.
Yeah, thank you.
We're old enough to be your dad and your mom, and we're having a grand time doing it.
Constantly evolving, right?
The future's bright for you.
Thank you.
We assure you of that. And finally, somebody said, well, we've seen what you've driven professionally. What kind of car do you drive personally?
Fabulous question. I love it. So I drive a Volkswagen GTI, which is a 6-speed manual transmission, and I love it so much. I have to deal with carbon buildup. If anyone has a Volkswagen, you might know that problem too, and so that was an expensive fix. But no, I love it. I will also say that I do not like driving on the street. Whenever my boyfriend can drive us, he drives because it's so frustrating.
I would like to see her drive on the street in a Volkswagen.
I'm like, yeah, it's just because you have to be so defensive on the roads here, or on the roads in general, whereas on a racetrack you're so offensive, so that's frustrating. People in the left lane, it's a passing lane. It hurts a little bit, but, and also, fun fact is that I'm a terrible parallel parker. I say that I don't have my spotter and I don't have to go in reverse in the race car, so I'm glad that I have my tiny little car that allows me to not make a total fool of myself when I'm parking, because I do that.
Julia, you have inspired us once again in our heart. You have educated us in our head. You've encouraged us to do it scared. You've encouraged us to be relationally intentional. You have inspired us, and we go leaving good about ourselves thanks to you. And thank you again for coming out.
Thank you guys for your great questions. I don't know if you want that.
Great. Just a couple of closing comments. I'm going to ask my colleague Stephen to join me up here. We'll just take a couple of more minutes of your time. But there's a couple of things we need to do before we leave, and if we don't, we'll be remiss in not doing so. First of all, I want to thank the unseen teams, including the hotel staff that worked so hard and that were hit so hard by the pandemic. Greg Palmer and the team in Cincinnati, Terry Bouvier, Jenny Bien, Debbie, and all the team out there who have really shown us what collaborative work looks like in a brand new type of conference. There will be more to come, I assure you. But they have done a great job, and we are grateful, and we're going to demonstrate that in just a few minutes after Stephen gives his shout-out so that we can have an applause for the behind-the-scene folks. Stephen, I'm sure there's some folks you want to thank.
Oh, absolutely. Well. I mean, first of all, thank you all for attending.
Yes.
I also really want to thank you, Greg, for the spirit of collaboration. And
likewise.
For 5 years now, since I've been, or almost 6, since I've been the director, we've had just really a very close working relationship. And I think it manifested itself here this week, that we put on a great event. The content was excellent. The speakers were excellent, as you just saw with Julia and others. So I'm very encouraged. More than anything, I would just say, like, all these things that I grew up with learning, and when I was working at Fluor and learning, people would say, one day we're going to be in a position where we're going to be able to do this. We're going to be able to make things safer. We're going to be able to do projects at half the time and half the cost. Like, we're there. I mean, if we don't do it, it's on us for not doing. Shame on us for not doing it. I mean, the technology, everything has come to a precipice right now where I think this is what's incredibly exciting. I mean, this is what gets me out of bed every morning, is to work with you guys and with Greg and other colleagues to figure out how to make this so much better. I mean, we owe it to ourselves. We owe it to the craft workers, the craft professionals, the other professional colleagues. We owe it to society. I mean, but we can do it, and that's what's incredibly motivating about the whole thing. So I leave here super energized about, yeah, the pandemic was terrible, and we've still got a little ways to go there, but I leave super energized about what's possible, and I'm really encouraged, and so, yeah, I don't know what else to say, but thank you, guys.
Let's give it up for the hidden staff and everyone that made this work. Thank you as well, Steve. Let's together believe in the art of the possible, right?
Absolutely.
100%. Yep. Take care of yourself and each other. We'll see you next time.
Travel well.
We thank you for taking the time from your extremely busy schedules to be a part of this important event. You're among the lucky who are able to attend. We hope you've learned something new and intend to take the innovations from the showcase and ideas presented this week back to your colleagues who could not join us. The relationships and connections you have made this week will prove to be more valuable than you could imagine. Our conference attendees share this feedback every year. We all share the same mission and vision to improve the industry, and the unparalleled network of people attending this event are passionate about making that happen. This week demonstrated how the CII-CURT Alliance can deliver the finest thought leadership from the people and companies that are steering our industry. Thank you for being a part of it, and safe travels home.